there's the 5, 6 biblical stories everybody knows. Garden of Eden, good and evil, flood, Exodus from Egypt. I mean, most of them due to the popularity in cinema, modern cinema, was the 10 Commandments or the Prince of Egypt and so on. But then there's also the classic story with Jacob and Esau, the wrestling, the battling twins. And of course later the story with the Jacob wrestling with the angel. May not be as popular as some of the other stories, but it's still pretty well known. And though it happened thousands of years ago, yet in it lies tremendous lessons, psychological, profound psychological, emotional, and spiritual lessons for us today. And not forced. When you read it properly, and you hear the story in that context, not just as an episode that happened so long ago, it really comes alive, and you're like, it could be, I speak for myself, it blows you away that such a story so many years ago has such relevance in our contemporary society. So exactly that. These twins are at battle from the moment that they're conceived, basically. In their mother's womb, they're already fighting. That's where the chapter begins. And Rebecca, who's their mother, has these twins struggling within, and she has a terrible pregnancy, terrible pain. She turns to God, why am I in such pain? Why is this hard? She recognized it was a difficult pregnancy. She never had children before, but she saw others. She had a mother, and she had, family, and so on. So God said to her, because you have 2 nations within you, and they're struggling for dominance, for control. When this one rises, this one will fall. When this one rises, the other one rises, the other one will fall. And yes, exactly what happens. They come when they're born, they are very different. The Bible puts it very, very succinctly. It says, and poignantly, that Esav, Ish Sayed, Ish Muhammad Yedid Sayed. He was a warrior, man of war. He knew how to hunt. He knew how to trap. He was a great war strategist. And then there was Jacob, his alter ego, antithesis. Jacob, Ish Yeshiv Aholim, Ish Tom Yeshiv Aholim. Man of, you could say, Tom means wholesomeness, innocence, peace, completeness. The scholar. So you have the warrior and the scholar. And these are twins. And they look different, they behave differently, but they're twins. And they struggle first in pregnancy, then in their early childhood, and throughout their lives, the story of their struggles. I've discussed this chapter many times in different contexts. But I want to talk about the struggle itself and how it reflects on our lives. And this doesn't even require a lot of thinking. If you just ask yourself, where are the struggles in your own life? So we all have conflicts. Who doesn't have conflicts? Now, sometimes we think we're like multiple personalities, at least a dual personality. We have struggles, the different voices inside of us. Our heart tells us one thing, our mind tells us another. Yeah. You have the voice of survival, the egocentric voice, the voice that is self-absorbed. My needs, my gratification. I need to take care of myself. And then you have the other voice. The voice says, no, help another. The voice of transcendence, the voice of higher purpose. And everyone has these 2 voices. How much time each voice has in your life, only you know. Maybe it would be a good exercise. I know you need a little time and concentration to, like in a day, take like a type of survey. Maybe we should make an app like that. That's a good idea. Where when you have this voice speaking to you and this voice speaking to you, just to figure out like who's a louder voice and who dominates, and how do you act when the 2 voices conflict. Obviously, if we don't pay much attention, we all know where the default is going to go. The lower common denominator, the easier approach, which is always self. It's like gravity. You let something, you don't put any effort, the inertia is just going to fall and just go downward. However, when you apply yourself and you think about it, you reflect, then usually the mind has more say than the heart. You don't reflect the heart, the impulsive heart is generally more powerful. Not because it's more powerful, because you're not allowing yourself to fight it or to resist it. But we all know intelligent people, when someone makes you an offer in business or in other ways, if you're intelligent, but you don't just buy into it because emotionally the person manipulated you or was able to make a good sale. Your mind, your reflective mind says, I have to think about it. And if you're trying to retain some objectivity, there's pros and there's cons, and you come back and say, you know what? It may seem appealing, it feels good and all that, but it's not for me. Unfortunately, most of us go the other way. That's why we make mistakes. How many times has someone, let's say, insulted you or said something to you that you took as a negative, you reacted immediately in a very angry way or a very retaliatory way. A day or two pass and you regret why you reacted that way, because then you actually find out that the person never meant it, and so on and so forth. There's a perfect example of an impulsive reaction. Had you reflected another day, you still could come back and say, hey, something, you know something, it's inappropriate what you did. But we don't think like that. The heart doesn't think, period. It reacts. It's an impulsive reaction, knee-jerk. The mind should be telling the heart, you know something? Let's put the brakes on, let's reflect, let's think it over, let's consult, and then we could always go back and determine, maybe we should respond, maybe best to overlook, maybe move on. I mean, what I'm saying here is daily little conflicts we have. Sometimes they have not much significance, they're just minor, trivial things, but sometimes they're very significant. They can be even matters of life and death and major decisions that we make. And now, of course, a lot of this is much more complicated, because it's not just, okay, if you're able to just identify, here's your impulsive heart, here's your reflective mind, great. The problem is it gets so convoluted, your heart is convincing your mind that it's subjective. That's part of the problem. In Tanya, he has a brilliant chapter 9, where he describes this conflict, and he says, just like the blood of the heart rushes to the mind and brain, because the brain needs blood, so too the impulsive emotions of the heart rush to the mind and make the mind think to justify your subjective position. How often have we been guilty of that? Now, most people don't like to admit that, and they may not even know it. That bias and prejudices are affecting your mind, and you really change your arguments due to a subjective position. This is why we have honesty, integrity, recusing yourself in a position, let's say a judge or another person who's in the power of make a decision. If you have an interest, you should recuse yourself, etc. Because the fact of the matter is, bias blinds us, and bias, prejudice blinds even the wise. That's how it is, and that's the nature of the beast. The only thing is, you're expected to acknowledge that, and then you can get some control over it. So it gets very mixed up, because many decisions in our life, we may think we made a rational, objective decision, when in fact it was based on an emotional impulse that dressed up and masqueraded like an intellectual argument. That's what we're very good at. Smart people are excellent at covering their tracks and finding ways to make sure everybody else is to blame, etc., etc. Like the guy that goes to the psychiatrist and convinces him that he's the one that's a madman, and he should be locked up, and the patient should be the psychiatrist. There are smart people that can do that. I'm not saying they're always wrong. Many psychiatrists maybe need their own help. Some people who are in that field, that's why they entered that field. But I'm not here to pass judgment on that. That's case by case. But going back to our theme here, so two voices. So the battle of Jacob and Esav are actually a Jacob within you and Esav within you. The description in the Torah of these two personalities are two voices within us. One is the warrior. What's a warrior? A warrior is a conqueror, is a dominator, is aggressive. It's taking care of its own needs. It's a battler. Some people, sharks, they call them in business or in other settings. They are out, they are go-getters, aggressive, ready to step on anyone just to win. And then there's another voice. The other voice is the Ishtam. Not a strategist, not a manipulative, not that shrewd. The person is innocent, an innocent voice that just wants to have some calm and peace, is introspective, studies, prays, soulful. Basically, you could say one is body-like and one is soul-like. And we have both of them within us. And guaranteed, without question, each of you here, everyone listening to this, myself, we can identify things in our day or our lives that are body-like, which means more physical-oriented, basically is driven by our bodily and physical and material needs, say materialism, matter, and spirit. And then there are things that are more spiritually driven. When I say spiritual, I mean in a more broader sense. I don't mean necessarily religious, transcendent. For example, when you're busy with your needs, which is to pay your bills, to take care of your health, or take care of your own eating, sleeping, and so on, then there's the other side of us, transcendent, where we want something beyond the daily quotidian, the daily grind and routine. And some of us express it through art, music, literature, travel, yes, religion, faith, love, romance. Now, of course, these are not mutually exclusive. There's an overlap. There are things that are transcendent that obviously are body and physical related. There are things that are physical that have some type of ethereal and ephemeral nature. But if you were to, generally speaking, there are two voices. And these two voices were put in us. Sometimes they're called the animal soul and the divine soul. Sometimes they're called the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara. The good inclination, the negative inclination. And essentially they're the distinction between what I said before, one's own needs, and the other is the transcendent voice. Survival and transcendence, if you wish. Now, frankly, just left at that, without any excess, both are necessary. You need to have a warrior. Who's going to protect you in case there's danger? You do need to be able to hunt. And hunt, I mean this in the broader sense. I don't mean necessarily physically go out and hunt, but I mean to go out and get what you need to survive, to pay your bills, to eat, and so on. The problem becomes when one dominates over the other and one enslaves, actually, it takes hostage the other. In most cases, and this is an expression from Hasidic thought, the soul is imprisoned in the body. What that means is that the body's needs, instant gratification, our temptations, the forces that seduce us, our emotional impulses control the soul's behavior. Because the soul can't travel anywhere without the body. So if the material needs of a person become the dominant force, the soul becomes trapped. And that's called basically the golus, the displacement of the soul within the body. So how the mystics explain it is that Yeridas HaNeshama B'guf, which means the descent of the soul in the body upon conception. When we are born, well, I would say first conceived and then born, basically a spiritual divine soul, Jacob, is entering into a body-like environment, an Esav environment. So right from conception, right in pregnancy, right in the early stages, is already a battle. You know, when you think of it, it is part of the mysteries of existence. But what some point happens is an egg is fertilized by the male seed, right? And it's one cell. At that point, it's barely visible. That cell will begin to multiply. The miracle of creation. Literally a miracle. And pop, here we are, sitting in the room with all our neurosis and all our stuff. You know, it all began with one little cell that you could never imagine would turn into this complex individual that each of us is. Right? Okay. So there's the physiological development, which I'm going to really address here. No, the stages, the first semester, the first trimester, second, and so on. But there's also more than that going on. It's not just a body developing. We know there's a life taking place. Because at some point, there will be a heart that will beat, and a mind that will work, and at some point it will be us. It may be a newborn child, so it's a child that's still not fully actualized. But it all begins at the early stages. So there's actually discussions in the Talmud, when does the life begin? When can you call it a life? The truth is, it should be a life for a second, because if it's a life for a second, something made it grow from one cell to multiply into two cells, and to four, and so on and so forth. So it's really growing as a life force from the moment of conception. The question, however, is when we can call it a defined life force, or the different stages. Again, this is not a place to go into. The Torah has fascinating stages of how it describes the development, not just the medical terms. But one thing is clear, two forces are meeting each other. Because we're going to have at the end is going to have a body. I'm talking about the vessel, the container, which is our physical body, and I'm talking now everything, from head to toe, the skeleton, the organs, the limbs, and of course the internal organs, and all the forces and all the cells and everything. And then there's something which I call soul, because the soul is not a stereotype for me. Some people don't like soul, so they use electricity, if you like, energy, a force, whatever you want to call it. As we know, these are semantics. The point is, it's not just a corpse. You're not just having a body without a soul, because if that would be the case, God forbid, that would be a death. That would be a miscarriage. That would be a stillborn child, God forbid. So you have two things working together. But medicine and biology and science can really mostly talk about, obviously, the body part. Because the body part is visible. You can observe it, you can examine, you can test, and you can study it. The soul part is a lot harder because there's no way, no one has ever seen a soul. You know, how do you put it under a microscope? and yet there is definitely a developing life force. So we have a whole body of Torah, maybe I shouldn't call it body of Torah, call it the soul of Torah, that actually talks about the dynamics of the soul. So just like there's a physical DNA and genome, there's a spiritual DNA and genome. And there's spiritual cells, and there's spiritual components and organs and limbs and so on. They're not obviously physical nature, but there's the power of vision, just like there's an eye, there's the power to see. And we know an eye is not enough to see. You need a power to see, because you can have, God forbid, someone dies at 120 years and their eyes are intact, but they can't see any longer because there's no power of vision. There's only the physical container. Think of it like a light bulb without electricity. The light bulb may be intact, but there's no juice running into it. So the discussions, especially in the mystical, the Kabbalistic, Kabbalah and Hasidus talk a lot about the dynamics of the soul, which is really the basis of a lot of what I speak about in these classes, most of my teachings, is understanding that, because by understanding, like just like you can't heal a body without understanding it, like you have to know, what is it made of, what does it need, what is it deficient in, what vitamins, minerals, exercises it may need to stimulate and grow and expand, etc., or heal. Same thing with the soul and the psyche. If you don't understand its pieces, it's not just saying, oh, you know what, okay, here, take this pill and make you feel good. There's actually forces that are ticking inside of us that can be exercised, and as a result, heal from psychic and psychological and emotional challenges, as well as issues like depression or issues like anxiety. Now, I'm not rolling out to saying that sometimes you need a combination of both, medicine and that type of so-called spiritual therapy. But it's very clear that psyche-related things need understanding of the psyche. It's not going to help understand the anatomy of a leg to treat a human psyche in that sense. So the struggle between Esau and Jacob, which is really just names that personify two voices within us, is the struggle between the matter and spirit of our beings. And that struggle begins very early in our lives, as I said, even before we're conscious of it, as soon as body meets soul, as soon as the physical meets the spirit, the physical meets the spirit. You know, in a way you could make some comparison, if you think in physics, between matter and energy. So we know Einstein, in his special theory of relativity, E equals mc squared, proved and shown, and today accepted fact, that energy and matter are really two sides of one coin, and they're basically reversible. The simple example of it, you take a piece of wood, it seems to be a piece of matter, you ignite it, you put it into a fire, it turns into fuel that gives off warmth and light. Another example, you have liquid water, H2O, you heat it, it becomes a gas, a vapor, you cool it, you freeze it, it becomes ice. So you have a solid piece of ice. If you're completely ignorant of what this ice is, you'd think that's all it is. Suddenly it melts, turns into liquid into gas. And this is a reversible again and again and again, which is actually the whole process of evaporation and rain, and the weather systems are all based on this cycle. My point that I'm saying is, I'm using simple example. Obviously, Einstein proved it a lot deeper than that, because even on a very subatomic level and atomic level, matter and energy are reversible. And frankly, some physicists will actually say what you see when you look with your eyes, your five senses, your eyes, ears, taste, touch, and smell, you're not seeing reality. You're seeing the outer surface of a projection of subatomic particles interacting with each other. So, for example, let's take colors, for example. We all know today, there's no such thing as an objective color, really. White is the natural color. But the prism, which means, for example, something is green, so it reflects in a way that affects the light wave, so you see that spectrum on the light wave, which is called green. So some people even argue that there's no such thing as really a green object. It's just a type of object that we call green because its particles, or let's put it, it's not the personality. Its makeup is that blocks certain light waves, and therefore it reflects as green. I don't want to go further into it. I'm just trying to point out is that what you see is not always what you get. You know, you see something, you see the surface level. And therefore, you can really argue that all of existence is really energy, just packaged in the package called matter, which is you can say that very well. If someone asked you about yourself, tell me, who are you? Are you some of your body parts? Or are you a personality? Are you a person with a mind and a heart that thinks a certain way and feels a certain way? We all know we'd rather see ourselves, and we do see ourselves as personalities rather than just a lump of clay made up of certain physical components with blue eyes, blonde hair, bald, not bald, whatever it may be that defines us. 5 feet, 6 feet. Those are measurements. Those are proportions of our container. But if someone to say, who are you? Who do I love? I don't love the container. I love what's inside the container. And I also love the container that it's inside of. So when you think of it that way, which is obviously we're not trained to think that way because we are linear thinking people, and we look at things on the surface. But when you give it a little thought, you realize, 1 second, the surface is exactly that. Someone were to ask you, what is the sea, the ocean? Let's say you have a child, the first time you take the child to the ocean, you show them big ocean, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Mediterranean, whatever. And the child said, what is this thing? Okay, so the basic example would be, the scripture, it's a body of water, it covers 2/3 of the earth, and is that it? Because that's all you see. Say, no, there are fish inside, and there are other species. And not only that, there's more than that. Now, if we never went undersea, we never took cameras down there, and we never scuba dived, what would we know? You see a few fish jumping out once in a while, then you see a fin here and there, so you realize they're sharks and they're whales. And maybe if you observe long enough, you'll come up, there's hundreds of species, fine. But no one would ever in their right mind ever predict that the world under the sea is more complicated than the world on land. It has a terrain.
Scattamo stanotte, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotte, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Gira musica, gira e non si ferma, come una galla do vento aita. Attira con narina, tamburello e abbacia come sua figliola. Scattamo stanotte, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotte, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Sinni e tunu, i voti si danno, tu na poco gli peputia. Sinda fettunu, i cappotti russi e si ricordano da notti buona. Scattamo stanotte, vini come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotte, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla.